I have been thinking about labor and delivery a lot this week. We started our birth class for baby number 2, and the whole first class was about reasons for choosing a natural birth and then a bunch of birth stories, really, and some birth videos. And it's gotten me thinking a lot about what my first labor was like. And my first labor was very different than the typical first mom labor. I hope it's not too loud out here. I'm outside during Munchkin's nap, so if there's construction noise and there are crows, sorry about that. But I've been thinking a lot about just what my expectations were for my first birth and how different my birth turned out, and not in a bad way. My whole birth, my whole labor, was about 5 hours and 45 minutes. Just shy of 6 hours, from like, hey, I think this is a contraction, to she was there. So that is about a third of the average first time mom labor. And my mom had a very, very long labor with both me and my sister, so I was ready. I was ready for that really long labor. I was super prepped for having a long, terrible natural birth, and it was a much different experience. It wasn't a bad thing that it was short, but it was very surprising, and it was very intense. I immediately started having contractions that were very close together and were very, very strong. I did not ease into labor. I did not wonder if it was labor. I was making dinner. My husband was fishing. We'd actually been out all day. We were running errands, and we had stopped at this park that's close to our house where my husband likes to fly fish, and we were walking along the river, and we were kind of joking that like any minute I was going to go into labor, because I was 40 weeks 2 days. And I said, you should just come fishing, like take me home. We lived a few minutes away. I said, take me home and I'll make dinner and you can fish for a couple of hours. And it was November, so he didn't think he was going to catch anything, but one last shot before we knew we were going to be having a baby. So he walked in the door at about 5:45, 5:30, and I was finishing dinner, and I was sitting in the kitchen, and I was like, oh, that was a contraction. And from that moment on, I had contractions every couple minutes. I think they started about 8 minutes apart, and my husband started to panic a little bit. Not to me, he told me this later, that he was timing them, and I'd have another contraction, and he was like, wait, that one was 8 minutes and 15 seconds, and that was 7 minutes and 30 seconds, and this one was only 7 minutes apart, and they were getting shorter. There was no, for the last 2 hours I've had this many that didn't happen. Almost every contraction was shorter than the last one, and he was a little bit afraid that he was timing them wrong or that he was missing something. And I called my mom and said, like, hey, I think I'm in labor. And my mom was like, oh, you may have a baby in the next day or two. And got off the phone with her and immediately hit the floor. Like, I was laying on the couch and I felt it start in my back. That's when it's like a real contraction. It starts like in my spine, and all I wanted to do in my body was get onto the floor on all fours. And so that's what I did. I like folded in between the couch and our coffee table, and like got into this tiny little space on all fours, and like had a good solid contraction. And then they were about 5 minutes apart. And after, I had no judge of time. So after, I don't know, an hour or two, we had called our doula. Our doula was out of town. So we called our backup doula, and she just kept saying, keep me informed, let me know when I need you there. And I was like, I'm really in a lot of pain, and this is really uncomfortable, but it's been 2 hours, so I'm just gonna suck it up. And we're gonna do a couple more of these. And I didn't get off the floor. I didn't move more than 4 feet. I moved sort of from my couch to the floor of my couch, and then we pushed the coffee table away from me, and then I sort of like crawled out to the other side of the couch and laid next to the couch. And that's as far away from the couch as I got for the first 4.5 hours. And every time I had a contraction, it was way in my back. I had back labor. I mean, it was back labor. And I was so focused on the fact that it was so low and so in my back. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't say anything. My husband kept bringing me water and cookies because I'd made like these healthy oatmeal cookies. And so he brought me, he was like, try to eat and, try to drink water, because in our birth class, our teacher had told the men to, be in charge of water and drinking fluids, and so he'd try to give me a sip of water. And finally, our doula called back and just said, hey, it was getting late. It was, 10:30 at night. She said, like, do you want me to stay in Nashville? She lives out of town. Or do you want me to head home? And at that point I was like, just come over and find out what's going on, because I was very uncomfortable. And I never had a moment of I couldn't do it or anything like that, but I definitely had a moment of like, how am I going to do this for another day? Am I going to be able to do this for 12 hours? I was just so out of it by that point of just every 3 minutes, this happened again. And it was so intense that I finally asked her to come over. She got there about 30 minutes later and said, like, let's move. Like, it was in my back so bad. She said, like, why don't we go into the bathroom? And I walked into the bathroom, and she kind of like plopped me down on the toilet, and I could not really move myself. And she walked out of the bathroom, and I threw up. And I was already shaking. I don't know how long I had been shaking, because I hadn't tried to move. I had just been laying down. But like once I was sort of sitting up and trying to move, I was shaking, and I was shaking pretty good. And I threw up. And I sort of threw up into the toilet, or into the bathtub while sitting on the toilet. It was a really beautiful moment for me. I really don't like throwing up, and I was very upset that I was throwing up. And I said, like, this is really, really intense. Something is wrong. Like, I'm a nurse. I knew that I'd only been in labor for a couple of hours, and in nursing school, during my OB rotation, it had only been about a year before this, or 2 years, I guess, 2 years before this. During my OB rotation, I had a great OB rotation where I was able to like check dilated cervixes, and was really very interactive. And so I've checked cervixes before, and I was like, my doula can't do anything medical. We had called the birth center a few times, but just a couple hours into labor for first-time mom, they weren't super concerned. So I was like, I'm just gonna check and see if I can tell how dilated I am. And then my water broke. So I yelled to my doula that my water broke, and she like rushed in, saw me, and then rushed back out. My husband is on the phone with the birth center by the time I'm like, I'm just gonna check. I'm just gonna find out. My doula walks back in, and so like I try to check to see how dilated I am, and there's the baby. Like right there. I have checked cervixes. I've also checked moms who were about to be pushing. It's pretty hard to miss too when you go to check a cervix and there is a head there. It's pretty obvious. So my doula starts yelling to my husband, like, we have to go. And my midwife apparently hears me can hear me yell during my contraction, then hears them say, like, there's she can feel a head. And then everything went very quickly. I was not part of any of these phone conversations, but apparently it was like, you need to go, somebody needs to be at the birth center right now, because it's not a hospital, so there's not somebody there 24 hours a day. We didn't live very far, thank goodness. So apparently my doula walks over to my husband, kind of gets in his face when he gets off the phone, and says, like, you have to leave right now, and she cannot push. Do not let her push. And my husband, who doesn't really understand what's totally going on, because I have not let him in the bathroom because I have thrown up and my water is broken and I feel gross that I'm sitting on a toilet, so I've sort of like barred him from the bathroom, you know, just kind of looks at her and is like, okay, that doesn't sound great. So I kind of get dressed, like get out of the bathroom, get into the car very slowly. I think I have 2 contractions just like that, going down the stairs, getting into the car, and my body starts pushing. There is nothing in me that is attempting to do this by my own free will. My body was ready to push and was trying to push. And my husband can kind of, I guess, hear this because we're like pulling out of our apartment complex, and my husband says like, oh, don't push. And the only time I yelled at him in all of labor was that moment when I looked at him and sort of half screamed like, I do not have a choice. This was about 11:30 at night at this point. So all of the street lights from our house to the birth center were flashing yellow. They were, you know, the red light cycle had stopped. Thank God, because we would not have made it. It took 11 minutes to get from our house to the birth center. We parked. I remember being so relieved, but also like at that point my body was pushing so hard I was not sure I could walk. My husband parked like 50 feet from the entrance. I wanted to kill him, but I couldn't talk at that point. Parked really far away, and I remember not being sure that I could walk physically. Made it to the door. My midwife is literally unlocking the door from the inside as we pull up. She has just walked in the building, and I have a contraction in the doorway, and she grabs one arm, my husband grabs the other, and they sort of half carry me into the birth center. We go into the first room, and for some reason, because I was having such bad back pain and I had been in the bathroom at home, my first thought was like, I have to go to the bathroom, let me go to the bathroom. And so my midwife like kind of lets me go into the bathroom where I throw up again because I am way in transition, and I told her that I didn't want to move. I was upset that I had thrown up, and so then I was crying and I wanted a towel, and I'm asking for a towel, and at this point my midwife was like, well, you have to move, and I said I don't want to move, and she looked at me, and this was, I think, really like the first thing that I even really remember saying to her, or like even really the first time I remember seeing her. She gets right in my face, and my midwife says, do you want to have a baby on a toilet? I said, no. And she said, then you have to move. And so I stood up and I walked the 5 feet to the bed. I laid down on the bed and I pushed, I think 4 times, maybe 5. And then we had a baby. And that was it. I was at the birth center for 7 minutes. There was, most moms, first time moms push for an hour or 2. I pushed on purpose, you know, less than half a dozen times. I also remember distinctly throughout my childbirth classes hearing over and over like that, you know, your mom's ready to push when, you know, when they're naked and they don't care they're naked. And I am I don't like that. I'm surprisingly modest, especially as I get older. I am more and more modest the older I get. And I was very much like, even though I'm a nurse, I was like, I'm not going to be naked. There's no reason to be naked. Like, that is never going to happen. Totally naked. Because I'd thrown up and like, it's just, and I wasn't paying attention. And just like, and I was the girl who was just totally naked. Pushing on a bed, flat on my back, like I never thought you know, like the one position that you never think that you're going to do when you're like sign up for natural childbirth, you're going to be squatting or on a bar or whatever it is. Nope. I laid down on that bed and pushed 4 times and she was out. So pushing is no fun. It was definitely the most intense part, but it felt so good to be doing something and to be like actively engaged in my labor. Trying not to push, way worse than pushing. much rather would be pushing and getting something done than trying to not push and trying not to have a baby in the car. And I never like totally went into like labor zone or whatever. They'll talk about like mommy's getting into that like deeply internal place. I didn't ever lose myself. Like, I remember every second of being in that car. I remember distinctly thinking, like, I hated the fact that we had leather seats in our car. It was a used car, and I hated that they had leather seats before, and all I could think about was I didn't want to have to scrub blood out of this car, so I really didn't want to push out a baby in this car. I was pretty with it. I feel like I was pretty there the whole time, which is good and bad, I think, for that particular labor. So I've been thinking a lot about this one and what this could look like, because, you know, they say that most second time moms, you know, their labor is about half as long as their first time labor. That doesn't usually happen when you have such a fast labor like I did, but it could still be very interesting. It is a little scary. I'm not sure what is more frightening, the idea of having a shorter labor than I had or a much longer labor than I had, simply because I want my midwife to get here. We're having a home birth this time, so one of the factors when deciding to have a home birth was the fact that we almost didn't make it last time, and I never want to be pushing in a car again. Like, if I can avoid that, that is like that is one thing that I would really like to avoid. So we're having a home birth, and I'd like my midwife to be here. I do not want my birth to be so fast that she misses it. But I have seen women in labor. I've been to many births as a nurse. I was trained in labor and delivery in nursing school. I've taken classes in childbirth education and doula classes since having my daughter. I took 2 childbirth classes last time because I love to over prepare so much. I don't even know how many childbirth books I read. It was a lot the first time. I know every sign of labor. I know every sign of transition, but because my birth didn't fit what, you know, 90% of new moms go through in a natural labor, I couldn't imagine that I was that far into my labor. Like, I knew that I was uncomfortable, but labor is supposed to be uncomfortable. So it didn't, and it wasn't so bad that I was, you know, I never begged for drugs. I didn't, you know, want a C-section. I wasn't screaming that I couldn't do it. I was just like, it just hurt. It just hurts. It was just a lot of pressure, and it's really not pain. It really is pressure. It's just really uncomfortable. And I kept thinking, like, this can't possibly be, you know, the end of labor. It can't possibly be transition, because I'm, you know, I was moaning, but I wasn't screaming, and I was uncomfortable, you know, but I wasn't, it never felt like I couldn't do it. It just felt like I didn't really want to be doing it on my floor by myself at 11:30 at night. So the only part of my labor that, you know, was unfortunate, or that, you know, wasn't exactly, you know, what somebody would want in a totally natural birth, is that I didn't know how far I was, so I didn't get help. Like, I kept putting my doula off and putting the midwife off, thinking, like, we've got 2 more days of this or 12 more hours of this. So I didn't, you know, I didn't go in. You know, it was late, so I didn't want to bother them by making somebody come into the birth center and checking me, you know, 2 hours into labor. That just seemed ridiculous to me. And I wish I had listened to my body that no, this is very uncomfortable, and I'm feeling a lot of pressure, and so somebody should probably take a look at me. I felt very convicted that I had to sort of like suck it up and wait, even though it was very intense. And this time, I'm a little worried that I'm going to call and be like, I think I had a contraction, come over. But at the same time, knowing what I know now, for me, that is probably what I need to do. So that's probably what I'll do. And I think my midwife will probably insist on that as well. because she would like to also be here when my baby is born. So the moral of my birth story is to listen to your body. And, you know, there's a lot of people that, first-time moms that will say, you know, I was sure that I was 10 centimeters and I was 2, and that's okay. Like, get checked and find out that you're 2 centimeters. But, you know, definitely if you feel like you're in a place where you're so uncomfortable, or you're having so much pressure, or whatever it is, or that you think, you know, is this right for this part of labor? There's no reason not to call your doula, call your doctor, call your midwife. Have them check. It's why they're there. You know, I think sometimes maybe it's better to be the mom that is sent home from the hospital because it's too early than it is to be the mom that accidentally has a baby on the side of the road because my husband would not have known what to do. Even though, you know, he went through both birth classes with me, you know, that's just not in his wheelhouse. So don't do what I did. But on the flip side of that, you know, I'm so glad that I had prepared for natural labor, because I was going to have a natural labor regardless. You know, my contractions were not 30 seconds apart for an hour, you know, where I would have known to go into the hospital. You know, I really went from 5 minutes apart or 4 minutes apart to pushing very quickly, and probably would not have, like, even if I'd planned for a hospital birth, I would not have been at the hospital fast or soon enough to get an epidural. There's no way. There's no way, because I have no idea when I was in transition. I had thrown up a good hour before she was born, and that is a sign of transition. So I was probably fully 10 centimeters dilated at 4.5 hours of labor. There's no way that I would have made it to the hospital. So I'm really glad that I had already wanted a natural birth. And I'm going to do another video in how I prepped for my birth, because I really think that in my over-preparedness, especially my physical, like what I did to physically prepare for the birth, helped a lot. Having baby be really ready and really engaged and really in my pelvis, and I had worked on stretching and on all that kind of stuff, so that maybe I did it a little bit too much. I had a really nice strong uterus, and had a really nice primed pelvis that was just ready to have this baby. So that's my birth story. We'll see in like 2.5 months how my first one compares to my second one. Hopefully we'll have a fairly quick, not too fast, natural, you know, worry-free, incident-free home birth.